These aren't the stories your mother told you. No, these are the other stories. Today's episode of The Other Stories is The Bittersweet Glimmer, written by Jessica Peter and narrated by Erica Ventura.
54, 55, 56. Laura smiled. She'd always heard that 100 strokes of the hairbrush each day would make her hair shine. She gazed out the big picture window. Another autumn. The sun shone on leaves turned shades of crimson and burnished gold. The grass gleamed, still fresh and green. People took advantage of the weather, cycling and walking on the path beside the river, cars inching down the main street. Laura stopped, blinked out at everything. Hadn't the river been bigger once? Bigger, stronger, different. She couldn't catch the thought, beating against the back edges of her mind like butterfly wings. She sighed, lifted the brush to her hair again. 57, 58, 59, 60. Laura stopped again. Something was off. Several minutes passed before she noticed what wasn't right. Her once soft and thick hair was thin. It rustled against her hand like the dry grasses of the fields back somewhere she had once been. She couldn't catch that thought either, and it crumpled to dust, as dry as her hair. Laura did the only thing she could and lifted the brush yet again. 61, 62. The door opened. A sturdy young man in navy blue scrubs stood there. He didn't look familiar, but not much did anymore. Laura peered at him, taking in the chestnut brown hair shorn close to his head, a faint scar on his neck, the tanned, healthy glow of his skin.
Laura, it's time for your meds.
He said her name wrong, with a single syllable. Too crisp, too Americanized. Laura winced at the pronunciation, then puzzled over the accent. Where was she? What was she doing here?
Laura,
she finally said. Then she turned away and let the memory of him standing there slip from her mind. She focused on the brushing. 63, 64, 65.
Laura.
The man's voice, sharp, urgent, mocking her name, snapped her attention back to him. He held out his big hands, as if he'd brought a baby bird to her, and Laura squinted down at them. Certainly not a baby bird. 2 circles and 1 oblong shape. She knew she should know what she was looking at.
Your pills, Laura.
Her name got longer every time.
Young man.
It wasn't worth the fight. Then the little shapes in his hand clarified in Laura's brain.
Of course,
she snapped instead, as if she'd known them as pills all along. Laura reached out to take them and was entranced for a moment. Her skin was as fine and pale as parchment, blue lines running under gnarled skin. The crabbed hand didn't seem to fit. It couldn't belong to her. She remembered lush curves and smooth skin, filled out and healthy. Yet, somehow, this stranger's hand was hers. The man in scrubs watched and waited, eyes hooded.
I will take the pills.
Laura grabbed them with a confidence she didn't feel.
Oh, you will, huh?
His eyes twinkled with something between humor and malice.
Your German accent gets stronger when you're not doing well.
Laura glared at him, her cheeks burned. The man laughed.
Yeah, whatever. It's not like you're going to remember this anyway.
It stung, but he wasn't wrong. Her high dudgeon was already fading, replaced by a merciful neutral dimness. Sometimes it was better not to feel.
Oh yeah, you need the big one chopped in half.
The man pulled out a butter knife from his pocket, set the oblong pill on a tray on Laura's dresser, and brought the knife down with a snap that made her jerk in her chair. He loomed over her, his size too big for this room, as he settled the pills into her hand. A plastic cup of water sat on the vanity in front of her. Right, she knew this one. She picked up the cup and then one by one flipped the pills into her mouth and slurped it down. Pride tickled her, and then embarrassment for feeling proud of such a simple task. She took in a deep breath.
Good job, Laura.
There was a young man at the door with short, dark hair and navy blue scrubs. He snickered, then turned and left. Laura swallowed, pleased to see that the water had dampened the gummy dryness of her mouth. She smacked her lips and delighted in the moisture. When she felt like this, she used to sing. She used to sing. Laura looked at herself in the mirror. Faded hair, roomy eyes, skin hanging in jowls. But this time, she recognized the person she saw in the mirror. She recognized herself. The face was aged now, but she'd once been something else. Something more. Laura rubbed her eyes and the thoughts tumbled out of her. A house of cards that she didn't care to play anymore. She'd been doing something before the pills. Before the man. Instead, she turned to face the window and watch the people and the leaves and the oh-so-passive river, ready to let the water wash away her anxieties. But the river wasn't right. This time, Laura probed her brain until she caught the thought, grasping it firmly so that it couldn't slip away. The memories tickled and nostalgia set in. For a time and a place and the person that she once was, even if she couldn't quite grasp it all yet. She used to be something more. Something more than they would ever have her be. She used to sing. Finally, the jumbled puzzle pieces in her brain slid into place, and she remembered who she was. The Lorelei of the Rhine looked out over the river in this unfamiliar country, this unfamiliar continent. Pretty autumn trees dotting the plush emerald grass. Mortals meandering through the park. Frustrated desire rose in her. To be truly alive. To not be trapped in this place. To no longer be alone. To be young again. And as the frustration spiraled higher and higher, she began to sing. The song bubbled up in her chest like a great flood waiting to be unleashed. She straightened in her chair, tilted her head back, and erupted in glorious noise. Her voice was a bell-like soprano, the music haunting, ethereal. Not in English, not in German, not in any language from this mortal world. Everything outside stopped. Walkers froze. People fell off bicycles. And in a grating screech of metal and humanity, two cars slammed into each other. The Lorelei ignored the crash and kept singing, pouring her heartache and frustration into the melody. Then the people outside moved as one. A hive mind of motion with a single goal: to get to her. She sang and she sang and she sang. People in blue and green scrubs piled into the room, those at the back clawing, kicking, biting to get closer. An outburst of petty violence. The young male aide with the dark hair and navy scrubs was at the front, elbowing the others to kneel against the Lorelei's legs. He grasped them like a shipwrecked sailor gripping a carved wooden figurehead of a woman. For dear life, or for something more. A seething mass of bodies crowded the window, the view blocked by crushed fabric and pasty flesh, hands and faces pressed against the glass in a desperate attempt to make it inside, to make it to her. The Lorelei didn't stop singing, even when one meaty fist hammered the glass. The window collapsed inward in a tinkle, blood spraying from wrists and faces unlucky enough to be against it. The mob of mortals collapsed too, a roiling mass of bodies, silent other than rustling fabric against fabric, and the soft crunch of bones and cartilage as they shifted, trying to get closer. 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 Still, the Lorelei kept singing, becoming herself again. Her skin tightened under her chin, and in her reflection she watched it shine with the glow of youth. Her hay-dry hair thickened, once again flowing soft and luxurious over her shoulders, while the curve of her breasts and hips filled, becoming once more that thick, hourglass figure she'd been renowned for. Her hands, still delicate and bird-like, became smooth. The man against her legs, navy blue scrubs, chestnut hair, always degrading, pulled the butter knife out of his pocket and jammed it against his own neck. As if by will alone he could make a dull knife slit his throat. He pounded it against the tender zone below his stylishly stubbled chin, the delicate skin turning red and mottled, a spot of blood appearing. The Lorelei turned away. A young woman in a pretty yellow sundress, bleeding through a shallow cut just below her right eye, reached out to her, hands tense with need. Unable to get close enough, she picked up a triangular chunk of glass and drew it along her wrist, a thin line of blood welling up. The Lorelei kept singing, but as she sang, she remembered she had lost the only thing that mattered so long ago. The only people that mattered. Singing allowed her to live again. She could be young. She could be something more. But she'd always be alone. Her features clouded, so she clenched her eyes shut, but stubbornly kept on singing, tears dripping down her cheeks. But finally, she got to the point where it was too hard. Sometimes it was better to forget. The Lorelei of the Rhine snapped her mouth shut, teeth making an audible clack. A murmur arose. Mumbles, gasps, screams. Laura's room was full of people, so many of them bleeding and injured. The young man with the dark hair that had been so rude to her stood first, blinking rapidly. He stared down at the butter knife in his hand and rubbed his throat, his hand coming off wet and red. Then he wandered out of the room in a daze. The people crowded on the floor also stood, if they were able, puzzlement written across their faces. They hobbled out of the room, using each other as crutches. Laura let the memory of the chaos slip away, let herself dim once again. She avoided any engagement when the people in scrubs came back to carry out the woman in the yellow dress, her arms streaked with blood. After only a few minutes, she was alone again, gazing out the window. Another autumn. The sun shone on leaves, turned shades of crimson and burnished gold. The grass still gleamed, fresh and green. An unseasonably warm wind rustled her hair, thin and dry as it was, making her feel young again. She smiled. It was nice to feel the air. Laura picked up the brush on her dresser and studied it, turning it around in her hand. She'd always heard that 100 strokes of the hairbrush each day would make her hair shine. She lifted the brush. 1, 2, 3.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Other Stories. The Bittersweet Glimmer was written by Jessica Peter, narrated by Erica Ventura, produced by Duncan Muggleton, and music by Duncan Muggleton and Tom Robson, and sound effects provided by freesound.org. The episode illustration was provided by Luke Spooner of Carry On House. A quick thanks to our community managers Joshua Boucher and Jasmine Arch, and to Joshua Boucher for helping with our submission reading. And of course to Ben Errington, that celestial star of social media, his digital footprint lighting up the online sky with the brilliance of his fame. Jessica Peter is a writer of dark, uncanny and absurd fiction and poetry. She can be found at www.jessicapeter.net or on Twitter or X at @JessicaPeter1. Erica Ventura is an artist, mother, bilingual narrator and a husbandry technician. How does she manage it all? No idea, but her artwork can be seen on Instagram at @EFVENTU, or you can visit her artist page at facebook.com/bioartsy. The Other Stories is a production of the Story Studio Hawk and Cleaver and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. That means don't change it, don't sell it, but by all means share the hell out of it. So, until next time.